Well, good morning, everybody. A very warm welcome to our webinar today, What's Next for Employee Engagement? We'll be sharing some trends from our employee surveys over the last couple of years and discussing the shifts shaping the employee experience. We'll be looking at how organisations are responding to these and what leaders can do differently to create improvements that last. So I'm Kate, I'm chairing the session today and delighted to be joined by two of my brilliant colleagues, Claire and Costa, who'll be sharing their insights shortly. So just before we start, a little bit of housekeeping, just to let you know we are recording the session, so we will share a playback with you, hopefully by the end of today. We'd love to hear from you, so please do use the comments chat function to share any comments, ask any questions and any reactions that you have. We love to hear from you. We'll do our best to answer questions at the end of our session today. Any we don't get to, we'll certainly make sure that we do so after the event. And do remember that we're here to help. So do contact us either during the session or afterwards. We'd be delighted to hear from you. So, a very quick introduction to People Insight for the benefit of those of you who don't know us. We're all about sharper listening and smarter action. So we help organisations to listen to their people more effectively and to take smarter, more confident action. We combine powerful AI with deep human expertise to streamline the journey from survey to action so that you can focus on meaningful change. Our goal is to help you to effortlessly turn employee feedback into tangible, lasting improvements. We're delighted to work with a huge range of fantastic organisations, including those that you can see on screen now, who we support to drive tangible action through effective listening programmes. Okay, so just to get into the content for today, at the beginning of this year, we did a deep dive into our extensive survey data to look at how the employee experience changed during 2024 and 2025. And while there were many interesting changes, we've seen little change in levels of engagement overall. So looking at the questions that we use to measure engagement, covering pride, advocacy, motivation, care and commitment, we actually saw very little movement. This actually wasn't a huge surprise to us. We know that these overarching measures are generally slowest to move. They tend to be shaped by more long-standing experiences and attitudes, but it does emphasise the need for a consistent focus on the employee experience in order to drive positive change. When we think about how we can shift employee engagement during 2026, we need to ensure that we're continuing to focus on the everyday experiences that employees have at work. We know that it's these everyday experiences that shape opinions, and that positive experiences do need to be ongoing and sustained to improve levels of engagement. We know that this is far more impactful and important than one-off initiatives such as team away days or a short-term action planning activity after a survey. If we have action planning activity that starts and then quickly diminishes, this is not effective. We want to ensure that these improvements are sustained and become parts of our ways of working. So in this webinar, we're really going to be focusing on three aspects of the everyday experience that we can focus on. So we're going to be looking at where we work. We're going to be looking at who we work with and how we work. Specifically, we'll be looking at the working environment of today and how we're able to combine efficiency with connection. In terms of who we work with, we're going to be looking at the vital role of managers and leaders and how we ensure clarity and consistency across organisations. And we'll be looking at how we work. So looking at the work itself, rising workloads for some, the charge of AI, and making sure that we're providing a fair and inclusive workplace. So to kick us off, I'm going to hand over to my colleague Costa, who's going to talk about where we work.
Thank you, Kate. Let me take control. Hopefully that's moved for everyone as well. So thank you very much. But if there's one thing that's still featuring part of our coffee chats with a friend or colleague or features in the boardroom debate, it's where we work. Is it hybrid? Is it remote? Is it home? Is it 1 day a week, 2 day a week, 3 day a week? People still ask the question, how many days a week do you go into the office or work from home? And as we know, there's no magic formula or solution that everyone agrees on. Neither is there a formula or solution that works for every organization and every employee. Everyone is different. But what we do know is this, that where we work dramatically shapes how we feel, shapes how engaged we are, and ultimately shapes how well we perform. Now, if we look at the data that we saw across the hundreds of partners we work with in 2025, in fact, if we look before, let's go pre-pandemic to begin with, we saw that physical work environment satisfaction was around 72%. We saw that jump to roughly 77% when lockdowns hit and the novelty of working from home was there. And then we've seen it come back down last year to 73%. This is 2 points down year on year. Now, where we work there's definitely an emotional consequence and emotional impact. So we know what we've seen. There's been quite a drop in that sense of belonging that Kate's touched on in that previous slides, two slides ago. It's dropped by 8 points. So our sense of belonging has declined over the last year. So we have seen that feeling of isolation going up a bit and that sense of belonging as well dropping. Every emotional consequence, every emotional feeling or impact leads on to a practical consequence. So we see that 53% feel within the workplace they can communicate openly. So that's whether we're working from home or in the office. So just over half really that feel we can communicate openly regardless of position or level. And we've seen a slight drop in that sense of help and support amongst our peers and amongst others within our place of work. So this is what the data is telling us with these slight changes. Now, bear with me, sorry, I think that's moved. Slow movement. There we go. Now, as we know, belonging and reducing isolation is more than just a nice to have. This isn't a simple bolt on to a long list of benefits we want to see in organizations. It's not a part of cultural niceties. There's a real impact here in how we perform and how we keep our individuals aligned to a positive everyday experience. So there's a performance risk to begin with. So we see and we know isolated employees are less productive and more disengaged. And we know what that means to have employees that are disengaged. They're rowing in the wrong direction. We know there's higher perception. When there's higher perceptions of belonging, we know there's an increase in job performance. So efficiency, effectiveness, and actual job performance is better when we are more connected. There's also a retention risk. So a strong sense of belonging can reduce turnover by quite the percentage, as you can see, which makes sense. The more aligned we are to an organization, the more connected. We're not going to be quick to jump to another opportunity should it arise. And we see this in our data every day. Belonging is a key predictor to employee engagement, which consists of things such as advocacy and commitment. So the more we feel that sense of belonging, the less of that isolation feeling, and the more connected we feel, the more engaged we are. The more engaged we are, as we all know, the more likely we're going to perform and generate those best benefits for that organization. Now, employees or organizations might think, okay, well, if that's the problem, if people feel more isolated or we're not collaborating enough, then great, get them back to the office, problem solve, job done. But we know that's not a magical fix for that issue. It doesn't drive and improve those everyday experiences. If we go into the office, we have our heads down on our laptops and just focus on just our work, all we've done is take our remote setup from home, moved it from one location to another location. That doesn't do the trick. These digital first habits, all it does is create a presence without connection, which can even worsen feelings of belongingness and reduce that sense of belonging and increase that feeling of isolation. Put it this way, people can be in the same room but still feel isolated. People can be in the same room but not collaborate or communicate. Managers can be in the same room as their direct reports and employees, but not necessarily coach, nurture, or develop them. So bottom line here, it's about having the right conversations. It's not, is hybrid good for us or bad for us? It's about having the right conversations and turning office time from obligation into opportunity. So what is that conversation? It's about what should we design each space to enable? So if we're thinking about online space, what's the first thing to think about? People and culture. Every organization is different. Who do we need our people to be? And what sort of culture are we establishing here to allow that, to help us get to where we need to get to in 2 years, 3 years' time? Workflows and tools. We need frictionless collaboration. If we're working in an online space, how do we collaborate? How easy is that? How is that inclusive? How does it meet different patterns and flexible working shifts and working from home online? How do we collaborate across those spaces? And boundaries in environment. If we're working online, at home, for instance, or remotely, do we have the right setup, the right space? We talk about health and well-being, but have we invested in it? And equally, can people switch off? We saw this during the time of those lockdowns. People struggled to switch off, even when companies did quite a bit to ring fence break times or lunch times. People still could not switch off. We blurred the two too much and so much, and that's crucial to think about when creating that online space. And how about physical space? Again, I'm putting people and culture up there because it's still vital. Every organization is different. Who do we need our people to be? What sort of culture are we establishing? And have we created the right physical space for that? We need focused work and spontaneous collaboration opportunities within the physical space. I've heard people say, and I've said this, I've been guilty of this, not going into office because I've got work to do. I've got too much to do. So I was literally avoiding the office because I had work to do. And I would only see the office as a place I go when I'm quiet and I don't have too much work. So then I can just chit chat and talk and catch up with colleagues, which was the wrong mentality. I need to go into work. If I go into the office space, do I have an opportunity and space where I can still put my head down and get work done? At the same time, are there instances where I can have that spontaneous collaboration? Can I just sit down with a colleague, ask 2 questions or bump into someone? And of course, considering the ways of working. Again, making sure when we're in the office, we can still connect with people who are online. We have the right mechanisms in place and the right technology and the right tools. So there are similarities between the two, but it's considering what works for the organization and what is the right thing. Now, you all probably heard of this example, and it's a great example what Pixar got right. They used the office as an enabler and not a mandate. It wasn't just come in for the sake of being in. They were smart with their approach with it, and they really maximized the opportunity of the space they had. So they had no isolated wings, so they tried to reduce siloed functions and siloed teams. They ensured there was the centralized shared space that everyone had to walk past quite a few times in the day if they wanted to get somewhere. So, to the bathroom. I actually read the bathroom was quite a way around, so hopefully no accidents on the way, but people would have to pass the atrium to get to where they need to get to and bump into other people, and that increase and maximize intentional collision, getting people to bump into each other, spark creativity, meet people you wouldn't meet otherwise, and there was a good example of them using it for that particular purpose. The experience in the office has to be different from the experience of being at home. As I said, you don't want to take your remote setup and take it to your workspace. That's not going to do the job. People are going to start avoiding it or just see it as a obligation. And we know what happens when that's the approach we take. We start to disagree and move away from what we're trying to achieve. It's also important to remember every organization is different. This is a great setup for Pixar. I can see it being a great setup for a creative studio where you need people to be a bit collaborative, you need some messiness perhaps, something a bit chaotic to just suit. This is not going to work for a law firm where you rely on more privacy. You appreciate client confidentiality spaces as well. You can't have a high sensitive case or client walking through this sort of environment to get to a private space. So really thinking about the type of organization. Likewise, we have an organization that has a call center and deal with lots of sensitive issues within the day. If you had something noisy and messy in the background, it's not going to support the culture or that work environment for the individuals. They're probably not going to want to go into the space. So where we work, as I said, is going to have a dramatic impact on how engaged and how well we perform. Now, where we work is one thing, as Kate said. Who we work with and how we work with plays a vital part in that picture as well. So I'm going to hand you over to Claire now, who's going to talk you through the who aspect.
Thank you so much, Costa. Yes, where we work certainly does have an impact on those day-to-day experiences. But like you said, so too do the relationships that we have with people at work. And arguably some of the most important relationships that influence those day-to-day experiences are with our managers and also the business leaders. And I think the underlying foundation of those relationships is built on trust. So as employees, we need to trust that our leaders are taking the organisation in the right direction. They're going to put their customers and clients at the heart of the decisions that they make. And we also need to trust that our line managers are going to listen to us. They're going to behave consistently and create a supportive environment that will allow all of us to thrive at work. So there's potentially a deficit, I would say, in today's society, a trust deficit, and that undoubtedly spills into workplace environment. So there's a number of external and internal factors that influence that. From an external perspective, it goes without saying, there's a lot of political, economical, societal challenges right now. You only have to, read the news to see what a state of flux we're in, and also conscious that it's hard to know who to trust. So in a world flooded with a lot of information, misinformation, and even disinformation and deep fakes, it's really hard to know who we can trust. And I think most people really crave authentic messages from trusted sources. Internally, there's also a number of challenges to that trust as well. We hear a lot of employees with concerns about where their organisation is heading. So they hear about cutbacks, funding shortages, mergers, competitor challenges, and understandably that makes them a little bit distrustful. And I think it's fair to say that most organisations are in a continuous state of evolution and change. And one of the things that is very pertinent now, and something that Kate is going to be talking about, is AI. So while some people might see AI as something that's going to make their life easier, there's a lot of people who are concerned about the impact on their job security and also how that's going to contribute to the spread of misinformation. And finally, we've already heard from Costa about the evolving workplace. So a lot of noise remains about return to offices, where we should work. And that whole debate is often built around trust, or in fact, mistrust from employer to employee about where they work and where they're most productive. So there's some ongoing challenges there to trust, as well as those elements that Costa mentioned about belonging and generally connection. So organisations do have a difficult time of managing people through this environment, but trust is even more important in the context of this rapid change and difficult decision making. And leadership is really important here. Leaders have an important role to play to create those environments that ensure that employees are trusting and loyal. Because when trust isn't present, that's when we see things like fear, cynicism, rumours. And it leads to things like a reluctance to speak up. So low psychological safety, stifles innovation because people are reluctant to bring up new ideas to the table. And that is all going to have an impact on an individual's intrinsic motivation, how they feel about their work, their productivity, and potentially impact on turnover too. There's a very famous study that's been going for 25 years, the Edelman Trust Barometer, and they do a global report. And some of their findings is really interesting. That it certainly points to the fact that trust is slow to build, it's difficult to maintain, and it's fast to break. And what we see in the top graph here is that trust in different entities is quite different. So, we trust the most in scientists and the least in government leaders. And actually CEOs don't fare that differently, and depressingly no more than journalists, with a 54-point trust index, which has moved marginally by 1 point since the previous year. There's also questions within that study that say, do people trust their employer to do what's right? And that took a bit of a battering last year and has taken a bit of an uplift this year. And I'd say with a score of 78 percentage points, that actually is quite a fairly strong level of trust in actual decision making. But more worryingly is the fact that 2/3 of people think that business leaders are purposefully misleading people by saying things they know are false or exaggerated. And that has jumped by 12 points higher than it was 4 years ago. So that highlights that this honesty and cynicism challenge is something that still remains. Our data shows an interesting picture and to some extent echoes some of that. So we have seen some marginal improvement about how people are feeling about their leaders. Although from a low baseline, we see some of the indicators improving. So leaders providing a clear vision, helping people understand how the organisation is performing, and also senior leaders taking the time to listen to staff. But I would say trust is remains in a fairly fragile state. So what can leaders do to build trust in the day-to-day? That's what we're looking at today. How can we build those day-to-day experiences? And from the work that we do with lots of organisations, we know it isn't built by a slogan or a one-off gesture. It's built through consistent patterns of behaviour over time. So when we look at the organisations we work with and some of the things that great leaders do really well, these are some consistent things that they do. So firstly, they do what they say, because nothing will build or destroy trust faster than follow through. So making a commitment, being clear, being realistic, meeting those commitments. And if they're not met, don't sugarcoat the bad news or delay it. Don't avoid talking about it. So, don't quietly abandon plans. Just stick with it, because consistency will beat charisma every time. Leaders who are trustful are also transparent and fair. So employees don't expect perfection, but they do expect some honesty. So that means explaining the reasons behind decisions, not just the decisions, and explaining the trade-offs and constraints. So we see in the work that we do, it's really effective when leaders stand up after surveys and with the feedback, and they face into challenging results and maybe explain why they can't address something that's come up, because that transparency is a signal of respect and reduces things like rumours and fear and cynicism, as does being fair. And fairness is something that really needs to show up when people are under pressure and when leaders are under stress. So a good leader will apply rules consistently. They'll actively avoid favouritism and make those tough calls with dignity and empathy. And when times are tough, employees are watching really closely to see how leaders respond and whether they are being consistent and fair in those stressful moments. Obviously, with the work that we do, we're really keen that leaders do as much as possible to listen to people, but because trust is built by listening, but also proving that listening really matters. So leaders will lose trust when listening goes nowhere. So to ensure that doesn't happen, leaders need to ask for input early, not after the decisions have been made. They need to reflect back on the things they've heard. They need to actually invite challenge and dissent, which can be quite uncomfortable for people, but really genuinely not just listen to the things they want to hear, but give space for people to identify, talk about the things that are important to them and identify the challenges and opportunities for improve. And it's really important that they show where feedback changed the outcome, or in fact explain why it didn't. So again, surveys are perfect case in point. How leaders respond and follow up on feedback is more important than asking in the first place, because follow up is what turns listening into trust. Trustful leaders also role model the values. So trust erodes when values are talked about but not recognised and rewarded. And that rewarded is quite an important point, because, if words and behaviours are one thing, but incentives need to be aligned to that. So as well as recognising people, genuinely promoting people who live the values, not tolerating high performers who do undermine or don't display those values, and actually match the incentives to the stated priorities. So people are going to believe what you reward, not just what you say. And finally, trusted leaders need to be human, not distant. So approachability really matters. And some of that can be about being present and accessible. So, regular FaceTime, in-person visits, town halls are always really effective. It makes leaders appear much more approachable and human. And also for those leaders to share some personal appropriate context. One of the most valuable examples of this I saw was for a large retailer where a CEO was really talking openly about his son and his son's disability within the context of DEI and why that was important. And that really had a huge impact. And being human sometimes means showing being fallible, so being okay to say, I know I was wrong, I don't know the answer to this. And again, some of the uncomfortable things perhaps leaders don't want to do, but could have a really big impact, because human leaders are going to feel much safer to follow. A lot of those strategies are very true for line managers, but arguably line managers have an even greater impact in the day-to-day. There's this Gallup statistic here that suggests that line managers account for as much as 70% variance in engagement. And you often hear the old adage, people leave managers, not organisations. So we know that they have an important role to play and could potentially help close that trust deficit. A DDI Global Leadership Forecast study did say that they'd seen a 17-point drop year on year for trust that people have with their immediate managers. And although far less extreme, we are seeing some challenges still in terms of line manager and line manager capability within organisations that suggest that there's more to be done here. So while some metrics remain static around feedback and coaching, treating people with fairness and respect, we've seen a 4-point year-on-year drop in the last 12 months. So unlike senior leader metrics, not necessarily moving in the right direction and more work to do. So this presents both an opportunity and a challenge for line managers moving forward. To be fair to line managers, they are often the squeeze middle. They're often time poor. They have operational jobs to do. They're responsible for managing multiple people. Their roles aren't always clear. They have limited bandwidth. And some of those managers have been what we call the accidental manager. So they've been promoted for being good at their job, not necessarily having strong people skills. And we often see a critical skills gap with this population. And what it means is that they can shy away from some of those difficult messages. So if they're the people that are closest to employees, they're going to trust most, it's really important that they are delivering the messages around change in a positive way, for example, rather than saying, oh, well, it's not me, it's them, or don't shoot the messenger, and avoiding those conversations. We see in many organisations that those line managers haven't actually received any training on how to listen, motivate, coach, give difficult feedback. So that's an opportunity because it will definitely pay off in helping manage this trust deficit. And one of our other reflections is that this line manager population often aren't receiving it themselves. They're not necessarily receiving coaching, motivation, and good listening from above. And senior leaders do have a responsibility to do that. And if they do, this will create a waterfall effect. So if line managers experience it themselves, they're more likely to emulate it. But with the right training and support, line managers do have this enormous opportunity to strengthen organisational trust. And there's 5 ways that they can do that and build that into the day-to-day. Firstly, bringing to life the strategy by connecting it with people's day-to-day jobs. So really make it a reality, create that golden thread so that people understand what they're doing and how that fits with where the organisation is heading and why. Secondly, managers are often the face of change, so they need to be at the forefront of implementing new systems or restructures, and those messages will land much better if they come from who they trust more. So it's really important that those line managers communicate the why as well as the what, because that understanding will underpin acceptance and people will see that as fairer and more trustworthy. Line managers can also focus on developing an everyday listening culture. So simple things, having regular FaceTime, one-to-ones, team meetings, that's really going to amplify employee voice. And the more people feel they have an input, they can share their ideas, they can feel involved and included, they belong somewhere, they're more valued. That's going to lead to greater trust levels. Line managers also have a significant role to play in operationalizing the values in a day-to-day way. So again, you know, values aren't slogans, they need to be lived and breathed, and people need to see that from their line managers. So if there are values around being more innovative, for example, it's line managers who have to create those opportunities for feedback, who give people genuine permission to fail in the day-to-day. And those are the sorts of things that will build trust. And finally, increase the focus on feedback development. The DDI leadership forecast report I mentioned earlier said that employees with managers who actively support their development are 11 times more likely to trust their manager, and those who receive feedback from their manager are 9 times more likely to trust their manager. So regular feedback, interest in their kind of future and their development, those aspects are going to build trust. You know, people being interested in you and where you're heading, that's going to build your intrinsic motivation, and people will feel more fulfilled and more able to deliver and thrive within their environment. So hopefully some useful suggestions as to how both leaders and managers can strengthen relationships and really build those levels of workplace trust. But Kate, over to you now to share some thoughts on how people are actually working and the sorts of strategies that can be deployed in response.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Claire. So yes, I'm now going to cover the third section, which is all about how we work. So when we look at the measures that we link to how we work, it's actually striking to see that many of the core survey indicators that we have stayed stable over the last couple of years. So things like using skills and abilities well, having opportunities to grow, and feeling comfortable with the workload. So this stability suggests that generally people feel capable, they're able to manage day-to-day demands, but persistent workload and skills pressures are still there. And this is perhaps showing also that work isn't evolving fast enough to meet new demands. And this becomes clearer when we look at how roles are actually changing. Job roles do naturally shift over time. So what begins as a clear remit when people start in a new role can gradually expand, sometimes in positive ways that offer stretch and development, but sometimes we simply add more responsibility and pressure. So for many employees, this could mean that there's more to do, people have less time to do it, and there's reduced space for thinking, reflection, and learning. So without good role design, this can lead to long hours, rising expectations, and eventually to fatigue or burnout, something that we're seeing in some sectors and in some roles. We know that when people have clarity, capacity, and a manageable scope of work, they can maintain performance, they can cope better with demands, and still have the headspace to grow. So getting that balance between stretch and support, trust and guidance is really critical. The employee-manager relationship plays a big part in this, as Claire's already mentioned. We believe that 2026 is the time to really clearly think about job design. So for years, organisations have focused on optimising people to fit the work, encouraging resilience, adaptability and productivity. But far less attention has been given to optimising the work around human needs. So the real opportunity now lies in shaping roles, processes and environments that are human-centred, inclusive of different cognitive styles, and thoughtfully supported, not replaced by AI. So using AI as a design lever rather than a silver bullet. So I'm just going to cover each of these three areas in turn. So firstly, thinking about human-centred role design. In many organisations, roles are evolving in fragmented ways. So responsibilities are accumulating, expectations are growing, and boundaries become blurred. So this can create cognitive overload, constant reprioritisation, and role sprawl, where task creep continues to grow beyond the original remit of work. On top of this, organisations can still feel that they're relying on a one-size-fits-all role, and it doesn't really take into account for different styles, different strengths or capacity. So if we had improved job design, this can make a significant difference. If we're able to clarify responsibilities, reduce unnecessary tasks, and align responsibilities with strengths while keeping expectations realistic, we can create roles that are both sustainable and developmental, supporting people to do their best work without compromising well-being. So next, thinking about neuro-inclusion. Around 15 to 20% of UK adults identify as neurodivergent, yet outcomes remain unequal. For example, only 16% of autistic adults are in full-time work. These gaps show that many workplaces still aren't designed in ways that allow neurodivergent people to enter, to thrive, and to stay. So to change this, employers really need to be intentional about role design, reducing unnecessary cognitive load, clarifying expectations, and creating roles and environments that work for different thinking styles. Awareness is improving, but employee feedback still highlights that there are persistent barriers, reinforcing why neuro-inclusion really must be a deliberate part of how we shape work going forward. So in the surveys that we run, we do get feedback from neurodivergent employees, and these are the types of things that we hear. Certainly, we get a lot of feedback that there needs to be increased awareness of neurodiversity. It comes up a lot that there's a real lack of understanding amongst the workforce as to what neurodiversity means, and this is a real barrier to inclusion and feelings of belonging. We also hear from neurodivergent members of staff that the workplace can be a really tiring and draining experience. So there's more that we need to do to really be thoughtful about an appropriate work environment. And we also know that neurodivergent people can have spiky profiles, so they can be really great at some things but struggle with other aspects of roles. And yet when they're treated in the same way as neurotypical employees, they can end up failing unnecessarily. So again, there's a real need to have a greater awareness of the strengths of different employees and ensure that people are provided with the right support. We're playing to the strengths of different employees. So also in our survey, we do get practical ideas from neurodivergent employees for building more welcoming workplaces. So here are some of the things that we regularly hear in terms of the feedback we receive. There's a need to strengthen neurodiversity policies, frameworks, and best practice to ensure that neurodiverse employees are fully supported. There's a need to invest in training, and many organisations are now introducing mandatory neurodiversity awareness training and then equipping managers to tailor work, communication and expectations for neurodivergent staff. There's a need for an open and supportive culture. Often we find in larger organisations that there are specific networks or employee resource groups. There's neurodiversity champions who take action to raise awareness of neurodiversity internally and making sure that others appreciate the value that they bring. In terms of the working environment, there's a need to create low stimulus, neuro-inclusive workplaces, so quiet rooms, low sensory areas and places to recharge, but also to maintain flexible and remote working options. So recognising the strain that the workplace can take on some employees and making sure that there is an opportunity to work at home some of the time. Also reducing the cognitive load by simplifying information, so using clear language in all communication, reducing complex papers and unnecessary meetings, and offering practical tools and adjustments such as noise cancelling headphones, quiet work areas, and reading support apps and assistive technologies. So in terms of job design, it's important to have a human-centred approach and to provide inclusive, intentional support for all. And of course, in 2026, we need to think deeply about the role of AI. We know that AI offers huge potential to boost efficiency and productivity, but many employees are unsure and are often concerned about what it means for their jobs. We're not yet seeing evidence that AI is easing workload pressures. Workload scores have stayed stable over time, which creates what we call the capacity paradox. AI is advancing fast, but people don't really feel that their work is getting any easier. So rather than expecting AI to fix work, organisations need to use it as a design lever. So done well, AI can remove repetitive tasks, free up thinking time, and also highlight where work is poorly designed, such as friction points, overload, or unclear processes. In this way, AI can actually make work more human, not less. And so when it's aligned to good job design, this is a really great use of AI. But technology alone won't deliver this, and around half of employees say that their organisation lacks clear principles, ethics and training around AI, which creates risks around trust and adoption. So like any major change, employees need to be informed, involved and supported. And that's why we're encouraging organisations to ask targeted questions about AI in their employee surveys to really understand how well the employee experience aligns with leadership intent and to make sure that people feel equipped to use AI in their day-to-day work. And so in summary, optimising work and not just expecting people to cope better is what we feel will drive sustainable performance in the years ahead. So when organisations are designing roles with human needs at the centre, they're embracing neuro-inclusion, and we're using AI appropriately, we can create environments where people can focus, grow and thrive. So that brings us to the end of our content today. We've really spent time looking at where we work, who we work with and how we work, and hopefully we've provided you with some helpful content. This all comes from our 2026 Trends Report, which is now available, and we would love this to be shared with you, and we'll make sure that this is sent out with the recording of this webinar. So before we end, just a little bit of information to share with you. I'm excited to say that launching this week, we have a new product launch on our dashboard. So results dashboards will now have upgraded action planning capability. So using our powerful AI tool Prism, our dashboard will enable users to automatically be suggested actions on the back of their surveys, and also managers' actions can be improved and refined with AI as well. So this is all really exciting. It's part of our commitment to ensure that we're supporting sharper listening and smarter action. And we're really looking forward to speaking to you about this very soon. And finally, just to let you know that we do run webinars frequently at People Insight. We have a couple coming up over the next couple of months. During March, we have an HE Learn and Share. We're delighted that the University of Sunderland in London are speaking. They're actually trialling a 4-day week. So it's a really interesting story that I think will be interesting to everybody, regardless of whether you're working within the higher education sector. And secondly, during April, we have a webinar related to our new brand launch of Sharper Listening, Smarter Action. So we are out of time. I just want to say thank you so much for bearing with us today, for listening to this webinar. As part of our commitment to the environment at People Insight, we're going to be planting a tree for every attendee through our partnership with Eden People and Planet. So thank you so much for joining us today, and we hope to keep in touch. Many thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.